years. So thank you all for coming, and thank you for being a part of this activity. This session is really about research. And the idea is sort of John's mindfulness. If you think about research, it's very focused, it's deliberate, it's careful, it's results-oriented, and the process is established over many years. Sometimes we think it's a little too slow. But today we are chasing bees, right? I mean, we're in this field of honey, of clover, with bees busy making honey, and that's what we're about. The marketplace is changing. Every day I pick up the paper, there's a new announcement. Level 3 in 2 years on some car, you know, something that's coming out. It's amazing. So what we've done today is ask some key people who've been intimately involved in research for many years to come forward, and Mark's looking at me when I said many years, like, no, that's not what I meant. Many years to come up and be part of a panel to talk about research. The structure here is going to be pretty simple. They're going to give a few introductory remarks, just a few minutes apiece, and kind of judging on the time and where we are on the calendar, we're going to open it up to the floor for questions. And hopefully you'll have questions for them. If you don't, I've got a good buddy here, Abbas Mohadas, ready to push a question or two your way. So I'll introduce the panelists, and you can come on up. Mark Norman is Director of Development and Strategic Initiatives for the Transportation Research Board. He's had a distinguished career, including serving as Director of the TRB Technical Activities Division and Deputy Director of the Institute of Transportation Engineers. And I'll let you, we can do it this way, yeah. Go ahead and give your couple remarks and have a seat.
Thank you, Ed, and howdy. First of all, I'd like to thank Texas A&M and the Texas A&M Transportation Institute in particular. As we all know, these organizations have had a long history of innovation and research, and a long partnership with TRB. I would say that we have more volunteers from TTI working on TRB committees than any other organization. And also TTI has conducted more of our cooperative research program projects than any other research organization as well. So again, TRB is proud to be a partner with Texas A&M, and we look forward to continuing that partnership in the future. So I'm going to pick up on a few themes that John Halikowski mentioned. By the way, John, you're looking very wise and professorial in your new beard, so I. Yes, well, I actually listened to you this time. It was very, very good. So let me start off with some good news. Unlike other policy issues, healthcare, education, and many other things are being debated endlessly at the national and state level, we in transportation now have the foundation for moving in bold new directions, as we've already heard this morning. Policymakers and the public are enamored with the prospects of transformational technologies and connected automated vehicles, as well as numerous hearings are being conducted on Capitol Hill in Washington. USDOT is issuing guidance on where these vehicles can be driven and tested and how they should be equipped. This is also continuing at the state and local levels. Numerous cities competed for the USDOT Smart Cities Challenge last year, and basically everybody is talking about it. So we have accomplished the first step. We have captured the imagination of the public and the policymakers. But just like the proverbial dog that catches the car, what are we going to do with it? Because success is far from assured. I'd like to point to a U.S. Department of Energy report that came out in January called the Transforming Mobility Ecosystem. That report, as a result of a number of roundtables in which TRB participated in and many other organizations, and a lot of research went into it, that report presented two scenarios. One on the more utopian side, that as automated vehicles catch on and they lead to adoption and shared mobility systems, less personal vehicle ownership, more more electric and zero-emission vehicles as a result of fleet ownership, that moving in that direction, we could see a future over the next few decades where gasoline consumption and pollution generated by these vehicles is decreased by up to 60%. But on the other hand, these automated vehicles catch on, they lead to more personal travel, longer trips, more VMT, more sprawl, more travel by transportation disadvantaged, less adoption of the vehicle fleet and shared mobility systems. Under that scenario, pollution and gasoline consumption could increase over the next few decades by up to 200%. So minus 60% to 200%. Those are the extremes that we might be looking at. And for every claim that we've seen in the press and even in research papers of significant decreases in congestion by deploying these vehicles, there is a counterclaim and counter-research that predicts the congestion will increase. And the same holds true for vehicle miles of travel, environmental impacts, and sprawl. And as we've heard, time is short as these technologies are advancing rapidly. So in short, we have more questions than we have answers. And when we have more questions than we have answers, what do we need? We need more research. And the private sector, as we know, is investing billions of dollars in research on connected automated vehicles every year. The challenge is for the public sector and the academic community to keep up with developments in the private sector. Because just as these technologies are disrupting transportation, so too may they be disrupting and can be expected to disrupt our research processes. In some cases, we may need more reliance on quick response research, as Ed mentioned, than a conventional public sector research that can take years to accomplish. We need to reevaluate our research processes at this time to maybe answer more questions and generate those answers in real time. We need more leveraging of field operational tests that prove successful in ITS. And not only do we need research roadmaps, but these roadmaps need to be dynamic in nature and readjusted in real time. We also will need more reliance on use cases and scenario planning than in our traditional rearview mirror research. And finally, we need to reevaluate the research policy interface. And I'll list a number of questions that need to be posed. First, what is acceptable risk? How much evidence do we need to move forward? What new approaches can we apply to peer reviews? How can we balance stakeholder influence? How should we deal with attacks on science and research? How can we help ensure that research is objective without necessarily being neutral, because we need answers? And we will need to strengthen the research partnership between the public and the private sectors and the academic community. And this includes expanding our historical definition of what types of organizations are really part of the transportation community. As Kirk mentioned, TRB will soon launch its first public-private university research forum on preparing for automated vehicles and shared mobility systems. The objective here is to not just to facilitate the deployment of these technologies, because that's not really the goal. The objective is to deploy these technologies in a manner, in a time frame that can help us to achieve broad policy and societal objectives. These include improving safety, reducing congestion, enhancing sustainability, spurring economic development, and ensuring equity. We hope that this forum will generate and maintain a living, real-time research roadmap and facilitate the partnerships to conduct those research, not only within TRB, but outside of TRB as well. The forum is expected to sponsor events to keep forum participants and others up to date on the latest research and its implications. As Kirk mentioned, the first organizing meeting will be held in conjunction with our Automated Vehicle Symposium, an annual event, and this year will be held July 11th through 13th in San Francisco. And as usual, TTI has been among the first to accept this challenge. They have stepped up to the plate and agreed to be a founding organization of this new TRB forum. So I'll close my remarks by saying that TRB looks forward to working with all of our partners, not only those on this panel, but all those that are in the audience today and around the country and the world to turn this prospect of success into reality. Thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate that. So, King G, I see you sitting there. He's going to be a speaker here and be on our panel. He's the Director of Engineering and Technical Services for AASHTO. He oversees AASHTO's engagement on connected and autonomous vehicles and transformational technologies from a technical and policy perspective. Previously, King had a 35-year career with FHWA, with leadership in their international programs, and with the last 11 years as the FHWA Associate Administrator for Infrastructure. So welcome, King.
Good morning. Thank you, Ed. It's really a great privilege to be with you again this year. And as I think about what Greg Winfrey said at his opening comments, when you think about the range of TTI activities in this space, it really does cover the breadth of what this conference is focused on. So that begs the question, why are we here then? If TTI is doing all this, why are we here? We're here because the space really needs public, private, and implementers. Many people have talked about deployment, and I think that's why we're here. There's been a lot of hype, a lot of focus on the technology and the development of that technology. But it's not just these technologies that are truly transformational that's changing, but it is our whole landscape in the transportation field that is changing. We have the intersection today of some very non-traditional sectors that have to really begin to work together. And these sectors have very different cultures, very different timescales. So when we think about the intersection of these sectors, we might be tempted to think of it as the synergy of public research and private innovation. And you may think that this is not quite an even juxtaposition, and it isn't because of the cultures that we're dealing with. On the public side, we have cautious stewardship and public safety. And you contrast that with very, very short life cycles and real-time adaptation and changes on the run. So what we really need today is truly systems thinking. And most people think we are a systems thinker, but we really are not. And we're not because we have compartmentalized so many different things. In some ways, we actually are about a system. For 100 years now, we've had the car, we've had the roadway, and we've had the operator. But we've allowed and relied on the driver to interpret the whole system and to make it work. When we think about automated vehicles, connected vehicles, and shared mobility, we really need to rethink the system of the car, the roadway, and the operator. And we really need to focus on research on the blurring seams, because historically we've been allowed in those three different sectors to operate independently, to develop independently, and rely on a driver to make sense of it all. But when we're talking about this new space, we really need to focus on research on the blurring seams of these traditional silos. We need to ask some very, very different questions than we've been traditionally focused on. When I talk about this intersection of previously distinct realms, some examples would suffice. We're talking about machine-readable pavement markings. We're talking about V2I functionality, just to give you a couple of examples. So when I think about this panel topic, I'm reminded of a book a few years ago. it's reflective of a mindset that many of us in the traditional transportation field have had, or may be having right now, as we face this future. And that is, Who Moved My Cheese? You may remember that book. And the reality is that some things are really changing rapidly, but some things are not. The Rellis campus has a Center for Infrastructure Renewal. So the pavement research, the bridge research has got to continue for that foundational infrastructure. But then there are a lot of things that are changing very, very quickly. And as we think about the transformational technologies, other things do need to change with them. We really need to think about what this does to the definition of mobility. We need to think about what business models really need to come to play. And I'm not just talking about money movements, but transactional activities, but also roles, who plays what roles. So when we think about this whole research realm, as a number of people have mentioned, what are the societal goals that these things are to serve? We're not talking about technology, chasing just technology for its own sake. So when we think about the public postures that our policyholders, policymakers may adopt, there are a couple to keep in mind. Are we to ignore what's happening? Are we to block what's happening? Are we to react? Are we to respond? Are we to cooperate? Are we to facilitate? Are we to collaborate? Or are we to accelerate? Since we're at this conference, we're definitely not talking about ignoring or blocking. And John mentioned earlier, 35,000 deaths a year on our nation's highways and streets. So I would submit to you that with that in mind and unrelenting congestion, the posture that we need to take is of collaboration to accelerate. Collaboration to accelerate. So there are a number of things that you all have been thinking about, but one of the things that I think we really, really need to focus on is what's the aspirational role of our traditional state and local departments of transportation? This landscape's changing. If we're going to do research, it can't be about our previous roles. It's got to be about our future roles. So I'm mindful of a couple of things in this tremendous change arena that we're into right now. I actually liken it to when we had the PCs coming into being in the 1980s. A lot of things were happening. No standards, and eventually it settled out. Or think about the mobile phone in the early 90s. Nobody had any idea about smartphones. So in many ways, we're on that cusp of real big changes with the future very, very unclear. And so scenario planning was mentioned earlier. We have no idea right now what the deployment pathway is going to be. So we need some real serious research on what those scenarios are and thinking it through in terms of how does this thing actually work. Many of us have seen a Google video about the blind passenger. But how does that blind passenger get into the vehicle? And when he arrives at the destination, how does he alight? Not an easy answer. So with that, I look forward to engaging in the panel discussion because there are many, many more questions than there are answers. So thank you.
He'll return in just a few minutes and join you on the stage, Mark, so you won't have to answer all the questions. Bernie Arsenault is our next speaker. After working 30 years with the Minnesota Department of Transportation, most recently as the Deputy Commissioner and Chief Engineer, Bernie serves as HDR, with HDR as Vice President and Director of their Highways and Local Roads practice. He leads initiatives that includes traffic engineering, bridge design, program management, asset management, and transportation technology. Wow, come on up.
Good morning. So I'm gonna break from the tradition a little bit because being from Minnesota and that howdy doesn't work, but what would be a normal thing would be to say something like, cripes, the weather's nice down here, you know? I wasn't here yesterday, so. Anyway, this really is an exciting time. I mean, we all know it. We're talking largely to ourselves a lot in this environment because of the tremendous change that's going to be occurring. And really what we need to do is make sure that we're looking forward, not looking back, because the future is so much different than what we've gone through. There's a lot of us here who have got that 30-plus years, you know, the gray hair shows a lot brighter up here. But we've definitely seen a lot of history with the transportation system, and we've got to be able to step aside from that. So what I want to do here, just in a brief moment here, is to take a moment and look at the framework, how that exists, and then we'll walk through some of the implications of that. Again, this is a forward thinking. So we've heard a lot about safety, and you know, there's no bigger towards zero death advocate than myself. This is, as John pointed out, one of the biggest things that we can do and directly impacts quality of life. Actually, with those numbers going up, I think last year we had 40,000 fatalities. That is not acceptable, and it is probably the number one thing that we can look to as a benefit from this technology, that we're going to reduce those numbers and by not relying so much on the human mind and the human actions. So that, by the way, the fact is, if you look at those numbers, they continue, right? And what are the main things involved? Well, speed's the main thing involved. Distraction, you could call that communication now with the cell phones. And so there's obviously a value that we place on that. And so if we can then introduce a technology to support that with higher speeds and with ability to not focus so much on the road because the technology is taking over, that provides a benefit to the user. On the operations side, you know, our world of 12-foot lanes and you know, shoulders and all that doesn't need to be here anymore in the way that we've thought about it. 2 12-foot lanes can become three 8-foot lanes with this technology. We can move those cars closer together. They're talking 10 times a millisecond to each other through connected vehicle technology, V2V. They know way better what the other vehicle is going to do than any driver could possibly know. Through V2I, V2V, and V2X, we've got a great opportunity to enhance the operations of our system and minimize future expenditures. And again, we heard about some of the challenges from a funding perspective that we can't hardly expand it because we're taking care of what's there. Well, if we can minimize or eliminate the need for expansion because we're using that real estate differently, then that's a huge benefit. Then there's the planning. And believe it or not, there's still some planners out there that are putting together these plans. That'll be updated in 5 years. They're a 20-year plan or such. And they're not talking about AV-CV. It's not even in there. We have got to start building that in there and be thinking about how are we going to future-proof our roadways. And so as we think about research, you know, those are the things we got to think about, is that scenario planning that we heard about and future-proofing. You know, what is it we need to do? Communications, power-wise, structure-wise, infrastructure-wise. We need to be incorporating that into our planning, but in order to do that, we need the support of the research community to help us make good decisions to that end. And all of that kind of rolls up into policy. And I know if I'm going to talk a little bit in a moment about the audience that we're dealing with, but if you're a reluctant participant in this, you can come up with a lot of reasons why this is not going to work. Still, I mean, I think that group is getting smaller, but one of the reasons is policy. And policy is happening all across the country. More and more states are getting involved, and we're starting to see some very open policy and a little more restrictive policy. But all of that's got to come together to allow this transition and integration of this technology to occur and take place. Now, from a research side, you know, we talk about basic research, which is what a real researcher wants to do, get in and do some new outcome that hasn't been identified before. And then there's applied research. And transportation works largely in the applied, at least if you're from a DOT like I am, working with people like Paul Carlson, Katie Turnbull. It's more of a applied. We need it tomorrow, and so we need to learn from that. And actually, I think that's true for this as well. Research has to keep up. And we're all having trouble keeping up with industry right now as this technology continues to advance. You know, Moore's Law, we can talk about all the ways that this is going at a pace that we're just not used to. And research needs to keep up with that. The other thing is as we've seen, the US DOT is moving away from pilots and research to more deployments because they recognize that that can be a bit of a roadblock or at least a bottleneck to getting this out. And so we've got to work from that regard. So all of this then, as we start to look at the institution or the integration of this technology and the benefits that it can provide, they're direct benefits from a quality of life perspective. And we get to now begin to look at the societal implications of this technology. Where we used to, myself included, look at transportation as the problem to solve, congestion, whatever it was, add lanes, you know, you got to deal with an intersection. We get to now look at transportation with this technology as a means to address societal challenges, just like the Columbus Smart Cities application or grant that was successful. So we're looking at things now like homelessness, like employment, mobility for the elderly, disadvantaged, and disabled. These are things that change, and you know, I think it was King talking about potential, or maybe it was Mark talking about potential for a lot more travel. But what does that mean? That means a higher quality of life for a lot of people that didn't have that ability to have that before. Options for my parents now, my mother now, is a lot different than my father who died 6 years ago. I mean, they're so much different, and we can provide a higher level of service, ability to get out to church or activities that are necessary. The other thing that happens as we begin to look at this differently is we begin to introduce non-traditional partners to this transportation community that we're so used to. A rather tight-knit and small community begins to expand now. And we're looking at automotive and at technology providers. When you do that, when you bring in the societal piece and the technology piece, you begin to see that there's an avenue for additional funding, non-traditional funding. Folks that have an interest now that didn't before. And that's one of the things we're going to have to look at and understand the impact of that. And finally, I just want to talk about the audience. So we're all here. I think we could safely put the folks here in that early adopter category. We're out there. We want to figure out how to get this in. We see the benefits. It's clear in our mind. At least the outcome is clear. We're not exactly sure the path at this point. But then when we look at state DOTs and other transportation providers, this is not that clear. And there are many cautious adopters that want to go, but they're not sure. And they need the research to prove to them that they can go forward and that it's safe. And finally, there's the reluctant participants that are going to be dragged along. But again, it places a high level of priority on that research and the proving nature of the research that this is all going to work. So it's really an exciting time, and I look forward to talking with you further at this.
So our next speaker is Chandra Bhatt. And I have to do this in a way, I want to be sure. He is the director of the Center for Transportation Research at the University of Texas at Austin. Expected to hear something when that got mentioned. He is a joint appointment between the Department of Civil, Architectural, and Environmental Engineering and the Department of Economics. Chandra's a renowned expert in the area of transportation and urban policy design.
Howdy. As they say, be a Roman when in Rome. And what is nice is in today's day and age, we can embrace that selectively. You see, whenever I come to A&M, and I have many friends here, many of whom are here, I very proudly wear my identity, figuratively and literally. You know, I always wear my close to burnt orange shirt, and it's very nice that my friends over here embrace me with open arms. And you know, we are certainly very happy at the University of Texas at Austin to have a close collaborative relationship with Texas A&M. And with Greg Winfrey coming on board, we look forward to continuing that. There are many, many collaborative efforts that we do together, and we are very happy with all of that. I do want to talk about two primary issues. One is many of the earlier speakers talked about safety, and it is very humbling. Each time we hear about the number of lives that are snatched away from us each year, and the previous speaker was talking about 40,000. Unofficial estimates do put the number of fatalities in 2016 as 40,000. I don't believe NHTSA has come out with its official estimates yet, but I believe that is close to where it is. And that is a challenge for us in transportation. And that's a wonderful opportunity also. I mean, what better way to serve society than to help society in extremely important ways? I mean, quality of life and life itself, I think, is so critical. As I like to tease my colleagues in other fields of engineering, including structures and geotechnical engineering, you folks study the properties of materials and how they behave under stress. What we do in transportation is we try to study the properties of humans when they are under stress, and it's quite a different thing. And so it's a challenge, but also an opportunity. And that dovetails with the issue that I believe we have to look to engineering, but also the social science implications of society as we move forward and embrace technology. I think we are all on the same boat in the sense that technology can do marvels and will do marvels as we move forward in terms of safety. But behavioral science is as important, and we need to associate more, I think, with people in the behavioral science field so that we move forward predicting some of the unintended consequences and working with those from the very start. For some of you who might know me well, and some of you do, I had a difficult time when my two kids left home. They are 20 plus now, but my babies, as I call them, even now. And the reason I invoke them is John was talking about having driverless vehicles and putting them in the driverless vehicle to go to school. Yes, and that could be extremely helpful in some ways, but I can tell you this. One of the things that I thought, going back in memory, is there were times and days when I would hope that my then teenagers would miss the bus, the school bus, because that's the opportunity for me to take them to school in the vehicle that I drive. And the reason is, wow, that's the time that they are captive. They have to give me the time, okay? Whether they talk to me or not, that's different. But physically, they are in the same capsule, if you will. And that provided me quite a bit of, I should say, emotional well-being. So I just give that as an example because at UT Austin, we have been working with social scientists to start thinking about some of the human connections and the human societal needs as we move forward into what is definitely going to be a transformative era. So I think we need to keep those connections mindful as we move forward. The second thing I do want to talk just a bit about is the education and training. There's no question that we are in a new era of education. Collaboration is certainly going to be a precursor, and I think it is important for the next generation of our leaders to be cognizant of the interconnections. We were talking, Darren and I and a few others yesterday. It's not transportation engineering anymore. It's fundamentally about quality of life. And people need to appreciate that, people need to embrace that, and our leaders tomorrow need to have a good sense of data analytics, of wireless networking, and of the social science fields and behavioral science. And how do we engender that? That, I think, is very interesting. And there are two thoughts that immediately come to mind. Certainly, one of the things that I have been emphasizing from a university perspective is, at a university, we all should not simply be very good researchers or very good teachers. We need to be good researchers and good teachers. I think that is very important, because you can bring the passion in the classroom through the research that is being undertaken. I think that is important. But I also would say that we all, university and outside, have a commitment, have a societal responsibility to engender more passion and also the interdisciplinary knowledge to this next generation. So one tangible thing I would leave all of us with in terms of the next generation is, for some of you who are in the industry, who are in the private sector, I'd appreciate it if you can make a commitment. Do not wait for us from the university to give you a call and ask you, please, would you please come by and talk to our students in our classes. Please do not wait for our invitation. We will do that, but sometimes maybe we are getting busy. It's perfectly okay for you to call and say, hey, I'm here, and I would love to come to a class or two and talk to students. So please keep that in mind as we move forward. There are some other things I want to say, but I think in interest of time, I'll stop here. Thank you, Ed.
You know, I was thinking about that captive children in the car, and I kind of also know how my phone works when I push Siri or Google or something, and I can just imagine when my kids were little that we would be discussing or arguing about the destination, whether we were going to stop someplace on the way to someplace. I hope that the car doesn't, every time they hear no, I want to go to the Sonic Drive-In, versus, no, we need to get you to class, the car doesn't keep changing direction. Our next speaker is Eric Mark Huttema. He is globally responsible for leading all efforts at IBM's Watson IoT team, focused on travel and transportation and public sector related to transportation. He's a member of the OECD International Transportation Forum Corporate Partnership Board, and as a global manager and a specialist in intelligent transportation solutions, he has experience in helping IBM customers in travel and transportation, automotive and logistics, analysis and movement data, weather. He told me that on the way here, he made a change of plans to avoid the storms and drove the last 100 miles or so, got off the plane. So I think he made the right decision. Anyway, he's going to talk to us. Please, Eric.
Thank you very much, and I'm really happy to be here. Of course, it was a little bit difficult to get here, but I was really motivated to be here. I love to be in Texas. In my career, I spent 2 years in Plano, Texas, working at EDS, one of my former employees. So you really, this is an office in between the Longhorns, and really, really nice. But now living in the Netherlands, and in the Netherlands we don't say howdy, we make it even shorter. We say hoi. So hoi. And let's move quickly. In IBM, I'm responsible for travel and transportation, and in IBM we survive by research and innovation. We wouldn't be there anymore if we wouldn't spend the money we spend on research. And the money we spend on research is moving, and we keep re-evaluating every time. We spent about $5.6 billion last year on research, and the way we spend it needs to be focused. And in my team, I ask my team to focus on a few things. Basically, I want them to focus on only 3 things. How can we help our customers and the citizens enjoy life? How can we save lives? And how can we reduce emissions? And the rest of the world still thinks that, emissions are a problem, especially if you live in Beijing or Shanghai, and I hope that in the US we'll see the same. But so let's focus on the first one, enjoying life. In enjoying life, and it's important because we spend about 1 hour per day in our vehicle, so it's good to enjoy life, but there is a big problem. Because the vehicle as we know it is not the vehicle for the future. Because we have seen the automotive companies build in a lot of stuff, but also a lot of new stuff is being beamed in, we call it, like the weather information. And most of the data now is being brought in. And if you then want to do research and innovation, you have to look at these three aspects. So our innovation is looking at how can we combine the built-in, the beamed-in, and the brought-in data and make them work together to enjoy your ride better. And especially with autonomous vehicles, self-driving cars, we think that the artificial intelligence of cognitive power of Watson should be aligned in there. Let's move to the second topic. I think a very important topic, saving lives. 1.3 million global road fatalities every year. And we see some examples in Europe. And I'm really, one of them is eCall. And I was involved with eCall from the start. Almost 12 years ago, we basically had it ready. And I'm very disappointed that we have only found the time that in next March 31st, 2018, we will be able to mandate eCall, emergency call in Europe. And it is frustrating that this has taken so long because it is a way to save lives. And what we now need to do is we need to refocus. And yesterday I was at the Florida University doing a presentation and we discussed DSRC. And I'm a little afraid that the research and the movement of what's happening with DSRC is almost as slow as eCall. And if you then hear Deutsche Telekom announce yesterday that in 2020 they will have 5G coverage across the whole of the US for the whole country, then maybe the DSRC community should speed up a little bit, also on the form of research. What does work? When we work together with companies, with automotive companies. This is an example of Porsche, where we use the car sensors, even the sound sensors, to hear when there is hydroplaning on a highway in Germany. Then we learn from that data, we take that data in the car, we combine that with the weather data, and we basically give the next driver feedback, and we make the car change mode to make sure that when you're driving about 150 miles an hour on the German highways and it starts raining and you hit a spot with hydroplaning possibilities, that your car is automatically switching into a safe mode. That is a good example of let's say, safety in the vehicles. Another good initiative is something I want to share with you. Three of the people I know quite well, the Minister of Transport from the Netherlands, Minister of Transport from Germany, and the Minister of Transport from Austria. And they work together to create one cooperative ITS corridor. This is something I think we should also have in the US, where states work together to implement one way of thinking and to experiment together, because you probably will be driving, especially when you're a truck driver, you will be driving across state borders, and you need to have the same system supporting you, or at least they should keep working. So good initiative. Last but not least, energy efficiency, reducing PM10, reducing the footprint. We have developed a car and it's in high demand. We wanted to have one for the Texas A&M community, but it's not possible because basically we're sold out. But this is last mile transport, a new way of transport, powered by artificial intelligence to make the car interact with their environment, with the users, and make sure that the world is supporting with less environmental footprint. So this is my introduction. So let's work together to make transportation smarter, and I hope in the panel we can answer some questions from you. Thank you.
So let's take 10 minutes for questions. That'll put us a little behind, but not too far behind, and we'll be able to make it up at the break here. So I'm open it to the audience. Do you have any questions on this research topic? Remember, we're being very mindful in the middle of the field with bees swarming around us. And sorry, John, I'm gonna borrow it one more time. So anyway, if you have some questions, please ask them. Yes, Scott.
Scott Belcher, my question is just what is the status of international collaboration on research currently? It seems like there's a lot of change going on in the world, and I'm just curious if that's impacted the collaboration on research.
So you ask, what's the status of international collaboration on research? Anyone?
Everybody's pointing down to this end of the table. This rostrum, so let me start. Yeah, there has been a fair amount of collaboration internationally on research. Speaking for TRB, as a matter of fact, Peter Sweatman chaired and led a symposium that we had a couple of years ago between the EU and the US on preparing for automated vehicles. And as a result of that symposium, two-day symposium, we developed a international collaboration roadmap between the U.S. and Canada based on several use cases. And the EU actually has been using that as part of the EU develops these 5 and 10 range 10-year research plans, and they actually started using that as a basis for their next plan. So there has been a fair amount of activity in that area, and TRB's been involved in that.
Yeah, maybe from a global perspective, I think what is really positive and was really positive, that a couple of years ago the National Academy of Sciences in Washington, D.C. invited the European ITS community, Ertico, and Peter and we're really involved there. And I think that started something great. There is real cooperation. And but I haven't seen a follow-up on that, so I would love to ask for that basically, and I think it's really needed. So Scott, good question. We need international collaboration because what is happening in the US is not unique, and I think we can sometimes learn from cities who are very advanced, like Singapore. We can learn a lot from other implementations. I personally have been in the board of ITS Europe and ITS America at the same time, and then you see that if you give the examples and share the examples cross continents, I think we can achieve more together.
Yeah. And we do have a summary report on the outcomes of that symposium, National Academies TRB Symposium, on our website. We have a Transformational Technologies website at TRB, and so you can get a copy of it there.
Thank you. Other questions? We got one, Gary.
One of the goals of America is for toll roads to be all interconnected. The issue to me is not the technology, it's the legal issues and differences in laws between states. We talk, and we're all either engineers or technologists of some kind here in this audience, but we also have a /government /legal issues with connected vehicles. Is that issue, in your mind, being addressed?
So Gary was asking about all the institutional, legal, and administrative challenges we have for this.
I think that people are looking into it and trying to address it. It's $1 million question or $1 billion question is what I would say. And I think it's even more than legal. I think we have some very difficult ethical questions that start coming into the picture, even before legal. One of the observations I like to make is, today we leave it to the human to determine what is the best course of action at that split second when the options are limited and when a crash is imminent. But when everything is going to be coded into a computer, I think it's very, very tricky because the computer has to be told in advance, what do you do if you have only these two choices, which is you crash yourself with injury to the occupant, or you plow through and potentially many other lives are lost in the context of a pedestrian. It has to be coded in. How do we address these kinds of issues? So I think there are many tricky considerations, and I'm not sure that we have clear answers yet, but I know there's a whole, and that also connects to what I was talking about earlier. We need to work, technologists, engineers, with the people in the ethical field, with the behavioral science field, in the psychology field. So a lot of that is happening, at least within academia, and I believe also outside academia, but yeah, it's still a very open question.
Sure.
I think if I understand another aspect of your question, and by the way, on that legal issue, TRB has had a legal digest for the AV area. Last year it was published, and it's an ongoing work. But I think on the cross-border issues, I think level 5 is our ideal. Interoperability is our ideal. But between here and there, I think there's a lot of opportunity to experiment. In the United States, we have 50 states, and we often like to say that we have 50 laboratories, because every state is a little bit different, every state has different objectives, and we can try different things. I think, as I likened it to earlier, the PC and the mobile phone, we're at a very, very early stage. So I think trying to clamp down on this cross-border issue prematurely could actually stifle innovation. I think where the NHTSA policy is right now with the 15 assessment areas is probably where we need to be, but we can't stay there. But we have to allow for these laboratories to experiment and come up with the issues and come up with how we address the issues.
So I see that as there's two lanes there, really. The first lane is the technology and the interoperability, which King, I think, covered very well. I do believe, and based on history and all of the innovations that we've seen, those things will take care of themselves. There will be some stub toes along the way and all that, but they are going to be resolved. I'm absolutely confident of that. The other side, though, is the policy side, and it's a very similar set of circumstances along that. And we're seeing a very similar path being taken where we've got multiple states that are out front coming up with some policy, some of them wide open, others more restrictive. And I think one thing I know about the DOTs and other road authorities in this country is they're very interested in best practices. And so they will be looking for that model that works the best, and then we'll be implementing that. And that's why this research side is so important, is to be on top of that much more quickly than maybe we have in the past, so that we can be more nimble as we're progressing through this transition.
Thank you. I'm kind of watching our time here. We're a little behind schedule, but we're pretty close. I think we can make this work. Would you give our speakers a round of applause, please?
Thank you very much. As I step down, let me just say three quick things. One is we'll be moving into the breakouts. So we have about a 15-minute break now. Get a cup of coffee, and we'll start on the other side of that wall in Celeste B and Celeste C. If you're second thing is if you're a presenter in one of those and you haven't gotten your slides loaded, please go over there right now. And Ben and Blake will be running the AV. And then third thing, when you come out of the breakout, we'll have a buffet line for lunch set up. Grab a plate, and we'll come back in here and eat in here for lunch. So thank you very much. We'll see you in the breakout sessions.